There are plenty of super annoying cards in KeyForge, and today we'll be taking a look at a few of the most irritating ones to encounter. But to preface this, however, some of the most iconic annoying cards aren't included on this list. Heart of the Forest, for example, is one of the most infamous cards out there for how excruciating it is to play against. Same with cards like Control the Weak or Aembermedes, but today I wanted to cover some cards that don't get talked about quite as often. Without further ado, let's get into it. First is a card I absolutely despise running up against, and that is Collector Worm. Collector Worm has a whopping 5 armor and reads Fight, archive the creature Collector Worm fights. If that creature leaves your archives, put it in its owner's hand instead. This ability is remarkable because it doesn't take things like elusive into the equation. The creature Collector Worm fights doesn't necessarily have to die or take any damage. As long as Collector Worm survives the fight, the victim of the attack gets archived. Even wards can't protect it as long as damage is dealt from the fight, and with 5 armor, Collector Worm is not easy to get off the board with direct damage, making it that much more of a nuisance. Next up is Emberspine Mongrel from Untamed. It has Hazardous 3 and reads, after an enemy creature reaps, gain 1 Ember. So pretty much, whenever the opponent reaps with one of their creatures, you get an Ember as well, as if you had reaped with it. This is a huge deterrent to keep the opponent from ever reaping until Emberspine Mongrel has been dealt with. And with Hazardous 3, that's not the easiest thing to do. Not many creatures can survive a fight against Emberspine Mongrel, and not every creature can even begin to fight it without just straight up dying beforehand from the Hazardous. And once it gets protected by Taunt or boosted up with extra power, it just becomes even more of a pain. Candle Unit from Logos acts similarly, but in some ways is even more irritating. It's significantly beefier than Emberspine Mongrel, at 5 power 1 armor, and reads, after an enemy creature reaps, draw a card. Action, capture 1 Ember. While Candle Unit's passive ability may not be quite as scary as Emberspine Mongrel's, since there's no risk of putting them at check by reaping, you can set them up for a really huge upcoming turn if you're not careful. Giving your opponent extra cards can be hugely detrimental, especially seeing as just reaping twice will put them at a whopping 8 cards to use on their next turn. And that action ability Candle Unit has to capture 1 Ember just seems absolutely gratuitous. I have no idea why on earth that ability was included. Just some extra incentive to get it off the board as quickly as possible. Next is a famous Mars artifact known as Crystal Hive. It's very simple and reads, action, for the remainder of the turn, gain 1 Ember each time a creature reaps. This is the sort of artifact you will want to use your artifact control on every time you see it appear. It's just too powerful to be left on the board, especially with the sorts of ridiculous shenanigans Mars could pull off back in the days of Call of the Archons. Gaining 2 Ember from every reap, essentially giving every creature the effect of a Dew Fairy, is insane. Reap 3 times and you have yourself a whole key. Even scarier are decks with multiple Crystal Hives. There are exactly 5 decks out there with 4 copies of Crystal Hive, resulting in 5 Ember for every reap. I've got no words for that. The deck list says it all. Keeping in House Mars, we've also got Aether Spider, another Coda classic who reads, Aether Spider deals no damage when fighting. Each Ember that would be added to your opponent's pool is captured by Aether Spider. Now, I absolutely adore this card. It's one of my favorites in the whole game, but my goodness is it annoying to go up against. When your opponent controls this creature, all your resources will be dedicated to removing it from the board ASAP. You could be generating loads of Ember, you could be stealing from the opponent or destroying creatures with your Ember captured on them, but none of it will ever go to your pool until Aether Spider is dealt with. An absolute nuisance of a creature, and what makes it even worse is when the opponent has plenty of ways to recur it and play it back down. Next is actually a pair of Saurian cards, Charybdis and Scylla. These 2 creatures always come together in a deck, and really play off each other in some dangerous ways. Scylla reads, each enemy creature gains reap, deal 4 damage to this creature, while Charybdis reads, each enemy creature gains before fight, lose 1 Ember. Together, this dynamic duo punishes the opponent for both fighting and reaping, 2 of the most critical and primary actions creatures have at their disposal. Without direct removal, you've got to fight to get these guys off the board, but you lose Ember in doing so, and if you'd rather reap, you're practically destroying your own creatures. Charybdis and Scylla are big creatures too, both at 7 power apiece, so you need to prioritize taking them out as quickly as possible, and chances are you'll have to sacrifice a lot in order to make that happen. Moving into Sanctum, we have Proclamation 346E, a popular artifact that reads, while your opponent does not control creatures from 3 different houses, their keys cost +2 Ember. When your opponent plays this artifact against you, you pretty much just have to resign yourself to the fact that your keys will cost 8 for the whole game, unless you have a way to get rid of proc, or you can establish a sizable board of 3 different houses. However, maintaining a board of creatures from 3 different houses is not an easy task, and chances are the opponent will be able to deal with your board enough to put your keys back up to 8 again. The constant key cost increase that Proclamation 346E forces on you is a very impactful tax, and one that can lead to things like cutthroat research and Too Much to Protect being even more effective than before. Also in Sanctum is Larry of the Lake from Dark Tidings. Larry of the Lake reads, "While the tide is high, each friendly creature gets +2 armor. This extra armor applies to Larry as well, and even though all that armor can easily be taken away just by raising the tide for yourself, it can still be frustrating to deal with. Extra armor makes direct damage way less effective, rendering damage pips or cards like Pain Reaction utterly useless. Well protected, Larry can be very annoying, forcing you to take the tide over and over just to keep that extra armor off your opponent's creatures." The last card for today is from House Unfathomable, Rakazel's Chant. It's an action that reads, "Exhaust a creature. If the tide is high, exhaust each creature instead." Suddenly having your entire board exhausted can be a huge pain, especially once your opponent starts comboing off of it with cards like Sleep with the Fishes and Storm Surge. Rakazel's Chant is almost like Skippy Timehog, but not quite as restrictive. You can still ready and use creatures if you have the cards in hand to do that sort of thing, but if you don't, then you can really only play cards or use artifacts that turn. It's a very strong card to be sure, and I think it fits in perfectly with all these other cards I've mentioned so far. Very, very annoying. But that's all I've got for today. I hope you all enjoyed. Let me know in the comments what cards annoy you the most, or what cards from this list you'd like to see burned in a fire. Check me out on Instagram, consider supporting the channel on Patreon, and be sure to subscribe if you haven't already. Thank you all so much for watching, and I can't wait to see you all again in the next one. See you later.